There's a kind of power that doesn't raise its voice, a kind of strength that doesn't slam doors, a kind of goodbye that doesn't beg, threaten, or explain itself. It's the moment you walk away peacefully, head high, heart steady, soul intact. And while the world may think nothing happened, everything happens in his heart. When you walk away peacefully, the first thing that happens in his heart is confusion, not the loud kind, the quiet, unsettling kind. He expected resistance. He expected tears. He expected chaos, because chaos would have made him feel important. But silence shakes a man. Your calm becomes a mirror, and for the first time, he doesn't like what he sees. No arguments to win, no emotions to manipulate, no words to twist, just space. When you walk away peacefully, the silence you leave behind does something arguments never could. Arguments are noisy. They give a man something to push against. They allow him to defend, justify, interrupt, and shift blame. Noise gives the illusion of control, but silence removes the battlefield entirely. There's no raised voice to overpower, no tears to dismiss, no anger to label as emotional. What remains is an empty space where your presence used to be. And that space speaks with a force he cannot interrupt. It presses against his thoughts when the room is quiet, when the day slows down, when distractions fade. Silence becomes the loudest statement you ever made. At first, he may mistake that silence for indifference. He may tell himself you didn't care enough to fight, that you gave up too easily, that if it truly mattered to you, you would have argued harder, begged longer, explained yourself one more time. But this interpretation doesn't last, because indifference doesn't linger, and your absence does. The longer the silence stretches, the more uncomfortable it becomes. He starts replaying conversations in his head, hearing things he once ignored. He remembers moments where you chose restraint over reaction, patience over confrontation. And slowly, it dawns on him, you didn't stay silent because you didn't care. You stayed silent because you finally cared enough about yourself. Silence removes his ability to rewrite the story in real time. During arguments, he could twist words, minimize feelings, redirect blame. But now, there is no live audience, no immediate response to manipulate. The narrative stalls. And in that pause, his own thoughts get louder. Questions creep in uninvited. Was I wrong? Did I push too far? Why didn't she fight to stay? These questions don't need answers right away. They just need space. And silence gives them all the room they need to grow. Without your voice filling the gaps, his conscience steps forward unprotected. There is a particular discomfort that comes from unresolved silence. Arguments can end with false closure, apologies that aren't meant, promises that won't be kept. Silence offers no such escape. It doesn't wrap things up neatly. It leaves loose ends hanging in the air. And those loose ends tug at him in moments he can't control, while driving alone, while lying awake at night, while laughing with people who don't know him the way you did. Silence doesn't accuse him outright. It simply waits. And waiting is far more unsettling than confrontation. Your peaceful withdrawal also strips away the role he may have assigned you, the role of reactor, responder, emotional anchor. As long as you argued, you were still participating in the dynamic. Silence signals departure, not just physically, but emotionally. It tells him you are no longer available to be misunderstood, corrected, or dismissed. This realization lands heavily because it forces him to confront a truth he avoided. Your presence was not guaranteed. Your patience was not endless. And your silence is not passive. It is deliberate. Over time, that silence reshapes how he remembers you. Not as someone who lost control, but as someone who chose restraint. Not as someone who needed the last word, but as someone who understood the power of leaving without one. The absence of noise reframes the entire connection. It elevates your dignity in his memory and lowers his confidence in the version of events he once believed. Silence becomes a teacher he cannot argue with, a lesson that repeats itself every time he reaches for a reaction that no longer comes. When you walk away peacefully, your absence doesn't immediately scream loss, it whispers it. At first, he may feel relief, no tension, no expectations, no accountability. The space you leave behind can feel light, almost freeing. But that feeling is temporary because absence has a delayed impact. It settles in quietly and then begins to work on him from the inside out. Without you there to absorb emotions, smooth rough edges, or translate his behavior into something tolerable, he is left alone with himself. And for many men, that is the most confronting experience of all. Your presence may have unknowingly acted as a buffer between him and his own flaws. You listened when he spoke carelessly. You softened moments that should have carried consequences. You gave meaning to actions that were inconsistent. When you leave, that buffer disappears. There's no one to reframe his behavior in a kinder light, no one to excuse it as stress, fatigue, or misunderstanding. The raw truth of who he is and how he showed up stands exposed. And the absence of your compassion makes that truth much harder to ignore. He begins to notice patterns he never had to face before. Conversations end differently now. Conflicts don't dissolve the way they used to. People respond to him without the patience you once extended. And slowly, an uncomfortable realization takes shape. You weren't the problem that made things hard. You were the presence that made things easier. Your absence highlights the role you played, not through words, but through contrast. Life without you doesn't fall apart dramatically. It just loses its emotional cushioning. And that loss is deeply felt. Facing oneself is not a single moment. It's a series of quiet confrontations. He might catch himself reacting the same way he did with you and realize there's no one there to steady the situation. He might hear your voice in his head during moments of tension, remembering what you used to say, how you tried to communicate. These memories don't come with guilt right away. They come with clarity. And clarity is unsettling when it arrives too late. It forces him to examine not just what went wrong between you, but what within him contributed to it. Your absence also removes distraction. When you were present, his focus could remain external, on your reactions, your emotions, your responses. Without you, the focus turns inward. There's nowhere to redirect blame when no one is there to receive it. No one to provoke, no one to correct, no one to silence. The quiet becomes introspective, whether he wants it to or not. And in that introspection, he may begin to recognize habits of avoidance, patterns of emotional distance, or a tendency to take connection for granted. There is a moment, often unexpected, when he realizes he is now responsible for his own emotional landscape. The comfort of knowing someone was there, even during conflict, is gone. The reassurance of your consistency no longer exists. And that responsibility weighs heavily because it reveals something important. He didn't just lose a relationship. He lost a mirror that reflected both his strengths and his shortcomings. Without you, that mirror doesn't disappear. It turns inward. And not everyone likes what they see when they finally look. Over time, your absence reshapes how he understands the past. Moments he dismissed become significant. Words he brushed aside gain weight. He begins to see that you weren't asking for too much. You were asking for enough. And while this realization may not lead to change, it does lead to awareness. Awareness that arrives without your guidance, without your patience, without your presence. You are no longer there to help him grow. And that, more than anything, forces him to face the reality of who he is on his own. When you walk away peacefully, you remove yourself from a dynamic that may have quietly revolved around control. Control doesn't always look aggressive or obvious. Often it's subtle, wrapped in habits, expectations, emotional leverage, or the unspoken assumption that you would always stay as long as you reacted, explained yourself, or tried to fix what was breaking. The balance of power remained familiar to him. Your engagement kept the system running, but peace disrupts that system. It takes away the tension he relied on to feel significant and replaces it with something far more unsettling: autonomy. Your calm departure strips control of its disguise. When there's no anger to provoke, no tears to manage, no emotional intensity to feed on, the illusion collapses. He can no longer tell himself that you were too emotional or hard to deal with. Your peace becomes undeniable evidence that you were capable of restraint, clarity, and self-respect all along. This realization is deeply uncomfortable because it challenges the narrative that justified his behavior. If you can leave without chaos, then the chaos was never the point, it was the cover. Control thrives on reaction. It needs engagement to exist. When you disengage calmly, you remove its oxygen. He may reach out indirectly, test boundaries, or create situations designed to draw a response. Not because he wants resolution, but because he wants confirmation that he still has access to you. And when that access is denied, not with hostility, but with quiet consistency, it sends a powerful message. He no longer dictates your emotional state. That loss of influence lands heavily because it reveals how much he relied on your reactions to feel grounded. Peace also exposes how much of the connection was built on your flexibility. You adjusted. You compromised. You tolerated things that didn't sit right with you. And he may have mistaken that adaptability for dependence. When you walk away peacefully, you reveal the truth: you were choosing him, not clinging to him. That distinction matters. It dismantles the belief that you needed him more than he needed you. And once that belief is gone, the dynamic shifts permanently, even in your absence. There is a particular discomfort that comes from realizing you no longer hold power over someone who once made space for you at their own expense. Your peace communicates finality without hostility. It says you are not waiting, not hoping, not trying to change him. You are simply done participating. And that quiet certainty is more destabilizing than anger ever could be. Anger suggests unfinished business. Peace suggests resolution. And resolution removes leverage. As time passes, he may replay moments where he mistook your calm nature for tolerance without limits. He may recognize how often you gave more than you received, how your stability made it easier for him to remain unchanged. Peace exposes that imbalance clearly. It shows that the relationship didn't end because you couldn't handle it. It ended because you refused to lose yourself within it. That realization reframes everything. In the end, your peaceful exit becomes a boundary that speaks long after you've gone. It teaches him that control only works when someone agrees to stay within its reach. By leaving without bitterness, you demonstrate that your power was never in reacting. It was in choosing when to stop. And once that choice is made, control has nothing left to hold on to. When you walk away peacefully, regret doesn't arrive immediately in his heart. It takes its time. At first, power tries to hold its ground. He may feel justified, even relieved. He may convince himself that things ended because you were asking for too much, expecting too much, or feeling too deeply. This initial phase is protective. It shields him from accountability. Power often disguises itself as confidence in moments of loss, but power without presence is fragile. And once the quiet settles in, that confidence begins to erode, making room for something heavier. Regret grows slowly, almost invisibly. It doesn't announce itself with dramatic emotion. Instead, it shows up in small realizations, moments where he recognizes how much you contributed without demanding recognition. He starts to remember the consistency you brought, the emotional safety you offered, the way you stayed grounded even when things were uncertain. These memories don't hurt at first, they simply feel different. But over time, that difference becomes a weight. Because regret isn't just about missing someone, it's about recognizing the value of what you mishandled. What makes this regret deeper is the way you left. You didn't explode. You didn't threaten. You didn't make him the villain publicly or privately. Your composure removes his ability to blame the ending on chaos or conflict. There's no dramatic moment he can point to and say, that's where it all went wrong. Instead, he's left with a quieter truth. It ended because of accumulation, small dismissals, overlooked needs, and uncorrected patterns. Regret thrives in that kind of clarity because there's no single mistake to isolate. The responsibility feels broader and harder to escape. As time goes on, he may notice that the sense of power he once felt in the relationship no longer serves him. The dynamic where he felt in control of pace, effort, or emotional depth no longer exists, and without you there to respond, that control feels meaningless. Power only feels powerful when it's exercised. When there's no one left to influence, it turns inward and becomes self-awareness. That's when regret takes root most deeply, when he realizes that what once made him feel secure now feels empty. He may begin comparing new interactions to what he had with you, even if he doesn't consciously admit it. Not in terms of surface traits, but in depth, in patience, in emotional presence. He may recognize that what you offered wasn't common, but he treated it as replaceable. That realization stings, not because he lost you, but because he understands he didn't fully value you while you were there. Regret intensifies when it's paired with the awareness that the loss was preventable. There's also a particular kind of regret that comes from missed growth. You may have been a steady influence, encouraging reflection, communication, or accountability. While you were present, he may have resisted that growth, seeing it as pressure or inconvenience. Once you're gone, he may recognize that you weren't trying to change him, you were inviting him to evolve. And now, that invitation has expired. Regret settles in the space where opportunity once lived, especially when that opportunity was offered with patience and grace. Over time, regret reshapes how he understands power itself. He may realize that true strength wasn't in being unchallenged or emotionally distant, but in showing up fully. He may see that the power he thought he held was temporary, dependent on your willingness to stay. And when you chose peace over persistence, that power dissolved, leaving behind a quieter, heavier emotion. Regret grows not because you left, but because you left with dignity, because that dignity highlights everything he failed to protect while he still had the chance. When you walk away peacefully, you take control of the narrative without ever needing to defend yourself. Dignity has a way of doing that. While conflict allows stories to be rewritten in the heat of emotion, dignity slows everything down. It refuses drama. It refuses spectacle. And in doing so, it leaves very little room for distortion. He may have expected you to react in ways that confirmed his assumptions, anger, desperation, or blame. Instead, your composed exit unsettles those expectations and quietly rewrites the story he once told himself about you. At first, he may try to hold on to the old version of the narrative. He may frame you as distant, unbothered, or emotionally detached in order to protect his ego. But dignity doesn't fade the way anger does. Over time, your consistency speaks for you. The way you didn't chase closure, the way you didn't seek validation, the way you didn't need to explain yourself repeatedly. These choices begin to contradict the version of you he relied on to feel justified. Slowly, the story shifts from one where he felt central and in control to one where you appear grounded and self-directed. Your dignity also reframes the ending itself. Instead of a dramatic fallout, the relationship ends with quiet finality. And that matters, because dramatic endings allow blame to feel mutual. Quiet endings place responsibility more clearly. There's no explosive moment he can point to and say, "That's why it failed." There's only the steady realization that you reached a limit and honored it. Dignity removes the illusion that the ending was impulsive or emotional. It suggests thought, reflection, and resolve, and that makes him revisit earlier moments with a different lens. As time passes, he may begin to notice how others perceive you after the separation, not as someone who lost control, but as someone who maintained it. Not as someone who was discarded, but as someone who chose herself. This external validation reinforces what your behavior already communicated. You didn't leave because you were weak. You left because you were clear. And clarity is difficult to dismiss. It forces him to reconsider his role, not through accusation, but through comparison between who you were and who he allowed himself to be. Your dignity also highlights the emotional labor you once carried. The calm you maintained, the patience you offered, the way you handled situations with care, even when it wasn't reciprocated. In your absence, these qualities become more visible. He may realize that what felt effortless was actually intentional, that your steadiness wasn't accidental. It was chosen. And in recognizing this, the story shifts again. You are no longer the person who stayed too long, but the person who knew when to leave. There is a subtle power in not needing to be understood immediately. By walking away peacefully, you allow time to do what arguments could not. Time reveals patterns. Time highlights consistency. Time separates emotional reactions from enduring character. And over time, the story he tells himself changes, not because you corrected it, but because your dignity made the truth difficult to ignore. You didn't rewrite the story with words. You rewrote it with how you left and with how you never look back to explain yourself again. When you walk away peacefully, the weight of your absence doesn't fall on him all at once. It accumulates. At first, life continues. Routines remain intact. Days move forward. But slowly, he begins to notice the subtle things that are missing. Not grand gestures or dramatic moments, but the quiet consistencies you brought into his life. The way you listened without judgment. The way you noticed details others overlooked. The way you showed up even when it wasn't convenient. These were never demanded or announced, which is why they were easy to overlook. And now, without you, their absence becomes undeniable. What he took for granted wasn't just your presence. It was the emotional stability you provided. You may have been the one who de-escalated tension, who understood moods before they were spoken, who offered reassurance without being asked. While you were there, these things felt natural, almost expected. But expectation dulls appreciation. Only loss sharpens it. And as he moves through moments where that emotional grounding is missing, he begins to understand how much he leaned on it without acknowledging its value. There's a particular realization that comes when effort is no longer reciprocated automatically. He may find himself explaining things he never had to before, or feeling misunderstood in ways he never experienced with you. Conversations may feel flatter. Connections may feel less secure. And in those moments, he remembers how you made communication feel easier. Not because it was easy, but because you invested in making it that way. That investment, once invisible, now carries weight because it's no longer being made. He may also begin to recognize how much freedom he had within your presence. You didn't demand constant reassurance. You didn't create unnecessary conflict. You trusted, supported, and adapted. That kind of freedom often goes unnoticed because it doesn't announce itself. But once it's gone, replaced by tension or emotional uncertainty elsewhere, it becomes clear how rare it was. He may realize that what he thought was normal was actually exceptional, and that realization carries a quiet regret. Over time, the weight deepens as he reflects on moments where he could have shown up differently, times when appreciation was assumed instead of expressed, moments when effort was delayed, minimized, or postponed because he believed you would always be there. Peacefully walking away removes that assumption. It reveals that availability is not permanence and patience is not permission. And that understanding arrives not with anger, but with a heavy stillness that lingers. There's also a realization that what you offered cannot simply be replaced. Not because you were perfect, but because what you gave was personal. It was shaped by your values, your emotional intelligence, your willingness to stay present. Others may bring attention, excitement, or admiration, but they may not bring the same steadiness. And when he recognizes that difference, the weight of what he lost becomes more personal, more specific, and harder to dismiss. Eventually, he understands that taking someone for granted doesn't feel like loss until the taking ends. Your peaceful departure marks that ending clearly. No accusations, no reminders, just absence. And in that absence, he carries the weight of knowing that what he once received effortlessly now exists only as memory. A memory that follows him not because you wanted it to, but because some presences once gone leave an imprint that cannot be undone. And this is the truth most people never understand. Walking away peacefully is not about proving a point. It's about reclaiming your power. You don't leave to punish him. You leave to protect yourself. If he learns, it will be in the quiet. If he grows, it will be without your guidance. And if regret visits him, it will be honest because it was earned, not forced. Your peace becomes the final message, not loud, not cruel, not desperate, just clear. Because the strongest goodbye is the one that doesn't beg to be understood. It simply leaves and lets the truth do the rest.